I'd like to welcome Adela Falk, also from the USA, POW420. Adela is also going to talk about really how we could possibly make all these policies, especially to do with police and legal stuff, a lot better. And we're going to start with a little clip.
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East. For centuries prior to about 1850, all the ships that sailed the western seas were rigged with hempen rope and sails. For the sailor, no less than the hangman, hemp was indispensable. A 44-gun frigate, like our cherished old Ironsides, took over 60 tons of hemp for rigging, including an anchor cable 25 inches in circumference.
I started with this particular video because this was made by the Department of Agriculture in the United States of America. They denied the existence of this video. We had to search through our archives in order to find it. And why I think this is so important is we were mandated by our government to cultivate hemp for our military. And now we're incarcerated, arrested, raided, and having our children took from us for doing something that the government mandated that we do. It just really goes to show who's in charge and at the given time, what our rules and regulations are. Currently in the United States of America, someone is arrested for cannabis every 36 seconds. Every 9 minutes, someone is arrested for cannabis in Australia, or in Canada. And 2,000 people every day are incarcerated and arrested for cannabis in South Africa. So it is definitely a global-wide problem. How many people here have been arrested for cannabis? And you know, a lot of times when we get through our judicial system, we just really want to get out of it. We're scared to fight it. We don't want to go to jail. We don't want to embarrass our friends, our family. We don't want to lose our jobs. And this is really, really a hard problem. And I understand that it takes a lot of courage to go against our system and to fight it. But if we don't stand up for the injustices and stand up for each other and our community, they're going to continue to raid and arrest and incarcerate us because we're low-hanging fruit. Kind of like what the gentleman was saying before us, they're not really going after people for cocaine. Some of these people are violent offenders. Cannabis offenders are easy. We're easygoing. And it's really, really easy to target people for cannabis. Sadly, there are stereotypes that our government system uses to come after us. I'm going to say I was really offended by the saliva test, and I'm horrified about it. I'm concerned that nobody's filed a Freedom of Information Act and actually asked them, what's the false positive rates? How much profit are they making? How many people are arrested and incarcerated? How much per person that tests positive for these saliva tests, are they going to jail? Are they paying a fine? These are your brothers and sisters, your neighbors, your kids, your community, your aunts, your uncles. We should be fighting this tyranny. People keep asking me, well, what can we do here? One of the very first things we should do is get these signs and stand out there against the law enforcement that's taking saliva tests, telling them that this is a gross negligence. This is a human rights violation. How dare they touch you? How dare they take your saliva? How dare they use something that a plant... Cannabis is not the only plant that tests positive for THC. How many of y'all use echinacea? There's THC in all of these other products in plants, but we're allowing them. We are literally allowing them to pull over your friends and your family members right now while we're celebrating this plant. I get that this is wonderful that we can do this and we can fight the system. But the way to fight the system is to get up and go out there with protest signs and let them know that we do not tolerate this and we will not stand for it. How many of y'all have heard of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition? How many of you have went to your local law enforcement and educated them that they don't have to support prohibition, that they can think independently and freely and talk and educate people on a science-based approach about this plant? If we allow law enforcement and other people to write your rules and regulations, you're never going to get safe access. We're never going to be able to truly enjoy a plant. I find it ironic that in the United States of America, they say it's legalized. It's not legalized, it's regulated. And with regulations, people can still get arrested and incarcerated and put in prison for a plant. In the United States of America, we have people serving life without the possibility of parole. That's a death penalty. These people will die in prison. And I'm not talking like kilos, and I'm talking 2 joints. And they are sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. We put murderers and rapists up for parole, and they're freed within 10 years. These people will never see a parole board. They will die in prison. And our policies in the United States of America, don't get it twisted. We are setting precedent for what you all are going to do and the rest of the world are going to do. We're allowing people to be sentenced to death for cannabis. What do you think your government's going to do? I'm just amazed on how much we're having a wonderful time. Yet during all of this, we have all of these wonderful assets at our disposal. We could go to the hemp embassy and ask them to set up a bunch of phones. And while we're enjoying today, we could be calling your local law officials, your governing body, whomever it is, and asking and telling and demanding them that start with science from all over the world. Talk to them about anecdotal evidence. How has cannabis helped you? How has it helped your friends and your family? If we don't educate people, who will? Half of getting out of the cannabis closet is being here at this moment, but continuing this debate and continuing this conversation well after this event. Do you all know when we discovered the endogenous endocannabinoid system? Do you know what an endogenous endocannabinoid system is? See, that's a problem. How are we going to end prohibition if we ourselves are not educated about the medicinal values of cannabis? We have receptors in our body that light up when we eat foods, that allow us to take in minerals and vitamins. We have those same receptors that are activated when we consume cannabis. Whether smoking it or ingesting it, we have cannabinoid receptors. This is what we call a biological necessity, right? If you need and you're lacking in calcium, you eat more calcium. We don't even know what the taking away from cannabis in our body is doing to us. All cannabis use is medicinal use, whether we realize it at the time. I just really feel like we're missing the point, and we're not learning from other countries, from other states, from bad laws, rules, and regulations. By the time I'm done with this speech, there's going to be thousands of people that have been arrested for cannabis, and that includes the people here in Nimbin that are simply trying to get into this event right now. Do we know statistically how many people by the end of this event are going to be detained, arrested, and fined? Does anybody know that answer? Does anybody care? Do we believe that people belong in jail for a plan? Yes? No? So at the end of the day, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to be caring that we got pot, that we're allowed to get high because we found our safe access, that we found our dealer, our provider? Or are we going to fight diligently to make sure that every single person has safe, reliable access to cannabis without fear of raids and arrest and being stopped for a swab? What happens if we were all down there right now while law enforcement is pulling people over, swabbing them, saying, no, we will not tolerate this injustice? Why aren't we there right now? How do we end cannabis prohibition if none of us are willing to take action? Yeah, every single day we should be marching out to the police department. Every single day there should be educational pamphlets that you go to whatever legislature, whatever governing body you have, putting it on the books, putting it on the docket, taking away plausible deniability. We just have so much education nowadays. This was made for World War II. This Department of Agriculture movie was encouraging people, mandating people to grow hemp. Okay, hemp and cannabis are the same thing. The government has added rhetoric and propaganda, and that's why we've differentiated the two plants. They're exactly the same. We think marijuana for cannabis for medicinal uses, $1 million crop. Hemp is the real $1 billion crop. We should be fighting diligently for, see, we can't even grow industrial hemp in the United States of America. Every single person in the United States of America is federally disobedient. Even if they're complying with the state laws, doesn't mean they're not breaking it. We have dual task force that any given time they can come and raid and arrest you. I want to share a story about how I call prohibition a genocide, because there are so many stories about our brothers and sisters that we don't know about and we don't hear about. About 8 years ago, this is a story about a Hill family, about a little girl named Alex Hill. She's 3 years old, and it's 9 o'clock in the evening, and her father, after putting her to bed, decided he wanted to go out on his porch and smoke a cannabis joint. And while he's smoking a joint, the neighbors call the police, and Child Protective Services come, and they take this little girl, and they throw her into foster care. The mom says, hey, let me have my kid. She's an epileptic and suffers from seizures. So they said, no, we're not going to give her to you. 2 weeks, this little girl's in foster care, and the family's going every day to go and visit her. And during this time, they're noticing bruising and cuts and scrapes, and they're complaining the whole time. Now, mind you, they took this daughter away because he was smoking a joint. The foster father that they put her into, this little girl named Alex Hill, was a marijuana felon, already convicted, already a felon. So one evening, the Hill family gets a phone call that changed their life forever. Their daughter was in intensive care, struggling and fighting for her life. 2 days after that phone call, she passed away. The foster mother picked her up and threw her and slammed her on the ground and murdered her. She got life without the possibility of parole, which is the exact same sentence we give people for a plant. And these are the sort of stories that we need to be sharing with our politicians and sharing with our governing body, because that's not justice. That's tyranny. That's genocide. We are being targeted for a plant. You know, we should be creating a spray that you put in your mouth after you use cannabis that messes with these tests. We should be actively fighting against this. I am just beyond myself with this saliva test. If we allow this to continue, if you all allow this to continue, I hope that you can see where this is going to lead to. You do know just being in the room with somebody when they exhale smoke will get into your mouth, and you can take that saliva test and you can test positive? What if your children were around while cannabis was being just walking down the road and they test? There is just so many ways that this can go wrong. How many of y'all know that there's still people in prison in Australia for pot? Every single day there's people being arrested. How many of y'all went back there and signed a letter to Tony while we're out enjoying today, celebrating and having a good time? We need to remember those people that are incarcerated for cannabis. See, like the people, the pioneers, the people that are willing to break the law, they're going to be the first ones to go down. And if you don't stand up and fight and be like, no, we're not going to tolerate this, they did it. They got your main guy. They got your one person that was willing to fight hardcore against it. And if they can get that one person, they checkmated you all. It worked. They scared you right back into the closet by standing up to this tyranny, to this tyrannical government that wants to incarcerate you, raid you, arrest you, throw you in prison for a plant is who you should be fighting against. You should run for office. You should bring an empathy-based approach to this war on cannabis, science-based approach to it. No rules and regulations should be passed until you could prove that does driving under the influence of cannabis make you a worse driver? No. We actually have statistics. We actually have studies that prove that this is false. Yet right now, we're allowing them to do this. Right now, as we're sitting here, it's okay. Because you know what? We got past it. We're here. We're enjoying ourselves. Look, I know that I sound like a downer, Debbie. I know that this sounds horrible, right? Because we're here to have a good time. But we can't really have a good time and celebrate it while there are still people being arrested and incarcerated for this plant. It's our duty. It's our responsibility to take care of it. Like the cannabis community is called a community for a reason. Because we care about each other. We understand that this is just a plant. But we need to take that mindset and we need to continue it. We need to talk to people about ending cannabis prohibition without fear. We need to identify what's rhetoric and what's propaganda. We need to normalize the cannabis plant. I just hope that people understand that until we stand up for our rights, because cannabis is a plant, it's a right. You know, like, who are they to say that you can't grow whatever you want, like, in your backyard? One of the things I think we should address as well, when you're passing rules and regulations, which is really what they are, that you don't pass bad ones, that we're not so worried about our own safe access that we just negate all of these other people because of us. We want ourselves. What we do in our backyard and what we do and put in our own body shouldn't be regulated. So when you want rules to pass, businesses will be regulated. Big grows, they'll be regulated. That's what businesses do. Big government does. They regulate businesses. But asking for regulations, I'm good with just 6 plants, or I'm good with just that, that's not legalization. That's not safe access to cannabis. Because if you grow one extra plant, you're going to get arrested and incarcerated. I just hope that we're paying attention to cannabis prohibition on a global scale. I just hope that we're learning and we're being more educated about the decisions that we're going forward on. And I hope that at the end of this event, that everybody signs a card to the people that are arrested for cannabis, that if you know anybody who's in prison for cannabis, that you reach out to your brothers and sisters, you reach out to the hemp embassy, you let them know what's going on. Look, these people that are in prison, they don't have a voice. You should be their voice. You should be advocating for them. What harm is it going to do to be as loud as you can be about your brother or your sister or your neighbor or that person that they consider the black market? That's rhetoric. That's propaganda. That person bent over backwards. They grew that pot or they smuggled that cannabis in. And we're the consumers. So we need to make sure that we protect that person and we advocate on their behalf all the time. I know that it's scary, but if we're willing to be here and we're already this open about our cannabis use, why aren't we fighting for those people that don't have a voice? Right? Just because we could walk down the street and we could protest and our voices are heard, What about the people that were too sick to be here today? The people that are too sick to grow their own cannabis? The children that could benefit from cannabis? Their voices aren't heard. They're not here celebrating it. Just like the loved ones that are incarcerated in jail. They're not here. We can't hear their voices. I just really hope that we see how weird this is that our government advocated for this plant at one time. And now our government throws us in prison for it. So we have what we call ghost cases or dry cases in the United States of America. And that's people that have never been busted with a weed, a seed, a grow, ever. There's somebody who's a confidential informant that's paid by the government that says this person sold me pot. That's it. And they go to court and they win. And people are thrown in prison for life for it. So we have private prisons, which if anybody was here earlier, heard May Moon talking about making marijuana bags for her cup that she found out later that were made in a prison. A lot of the stores in the United States of America use prisons. They pay their employees 14 cents an hour. That's if you have a high school diploma, 9 cents an hour if you don't. Every time you call major stores like Victoria's Secret, you're probably talking to an inmate. Idaho potatoes, all grown by inmates. Senators' desks and representative desks in the United States of America are made by inmates for 14 cents an hour. It's slave labor. We have more people in the American judicial systems that are African Americans than we had slaves back in the day. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. Louisiana in the United States is the world's capital for inmates, for incarcerated. African Americans are 7% of Louisiana's population and 90% of the inmates. So that stereotyping that's happening here in Nimbin because of a hairstyle or because of a look, that's perpetuated throughout ethnicities, throughout generations, throughout poverty gaps. It's our responsibility and our diligent, we need to be diligent about it. I'm hoping that maybe tomorrow we can get together and literally go down to where they're stopping and swabbing, and we can make some signs and say, this is horrible. How dare you violate our body? What's next? You know, like the gentleman was saying before it here, I never consent. I know that there's different rules and regulations, and they're going to peer pressure you to do things. You see, the law enforcement is a gang. They're a gang. It's us against them. I call it the just us system. So like, for example, in the United States of America, the judge, the prosecutor, the juror, the court reporter, the law enforcement officers, the parole board, the prisons, they're all paid by the same governing body. The only person that's not paid in a courtroom is the defendant. And the defendant, if they can afford an attorney, is paying somebody. So if their paychecks are all coming from the same body, the same government, whose interest do you think they have in mind? Everybody in that courtroom is going to go home at the end of the day except for that defendant. They're going to go back to a governing body which is also paid by the same governing body that is paying the judge. It's tyranny, and we need to understand that until we stand up for these injustices, I'm not sure if you can go to court support for somebody who's going up to court out here, but you can stand in front of the courthouse. Every time somebody goes to court, you can stand in front of them, call your news, do press releases. A week before they go to court, ask the hemp embassy if they could set up a phone. You could do phone drives. You could do letter drives. You could do character references about this individual. If this person, like Tony Bauer, that everybody's talking about, was such an amazing human being, cultivating cannabis and providing it to sick and dying people and to children, why are we not every week having phone drives for him? Why are we not writing wonderful letters and just inundating your judicial system and your law enforcement and your governing body about how we're not going to tolerate it? There's thousands of people here. Yes, and tomorrow I'm going to be collecting letters for him. So every day I'm going to pick a different person There's only 3 that I'm going to be going through. So by all means, I'm hoping that we have hundreds of letters that we can send them and let them know that while we're celebrating today and we're having a good time, that we haven't forgot about those people that are incarcerated in prison and in jail. You know, in some states, you have to pay to be in jail. So when you get out of prison, they give you a bill. Not only that, you lose all access to any disability. You lose access to any housing assistance, any food assistance, gone. School assistance, it's all gone. 1 in 3 Americans are a felon. And when you're a felon, you can't even vote in some states. So your entire voice is took from you. And it's our responsibility to speak for them. Because see, this is just a plant, right? This is a victimless crime. And it's the law that's unjust. It's the law that's the crime. So this is called Hemp for Victory. It's an amazing short film. It's about 15 minutes long. So if y'all have an opportunity or a chance to watch it, super educational. Knowing the statistics and knowing all of this is what's really going to help better your fight. I really encourage somebody at the very end of this, because I'm not familiar with your system, to file the Freedom of Information Act with a couple of relevant questions when it comes to the saliva swabbing, especially here in Nimbin, especially for these 3 days. How much did it cost your law enforcement? How many people were arrested? How much money, monetary fines, like how much are they going to collect from it? And how much damage did it do to your neighborhood? Did anybody get in a car accident during this weekend? If yes, what were they on? Was it just a normal accident? Was it alcohol related? You know, some of these things that you can use when you go and you talk to your governing officials really is going to hold weight. How much does it cost every day to keep someone in prison out here? In America, it's $60 a day. Taxpayers pay for it. $60 a day. You should know how much it costs to keep your brothers and sisters incarcerated for 1 day, and how much of it comes out of your money. How much comes from taxpayers? For one person. Wow. And how much does it cost to go to college?
Oh, well, if you're on welfare here, it's maybe, 12,000, 13,000 you get a year.
See, and so rehabilitation, right? We should have drug courts. I don't believe anybody should be in jail for a plant. That's my personal opinion. But let's make it to where we start somewhere. Let's stop incarcerating them. Let's stop throwing them in prison. Let's create a drug court. Let's create counseling and rehabilitation versus this. Let's decriminalize cannabis. Let's legalize it first off. Let's stop throwing people in prison for it. But I'm really hoping at the very end of all of this, what you're going to take from my speech is that every single individual, every single person in here has the ability to change the laws. It's about coming at your politicians with facts. It's about coming at your politicians with numbers and letting them know that the numbers aren't adding up. You know, how much money did this wonderful event bring to the community? And how much is it discouraging people to come when they know they're going to get pulled over and get saliva swabbed and possibly get arrested, possibly to get incarcerated, definitely pay a fine? Where are we at with this, and why are we allowing it? So when you come at people with numbers, especially politicians, is really when you can change things. And I strongly encourage you all to write to these people, find out their story. Because when you know their story, especially when you know the numbers that to keep them incarcerated, when you've created a rapport and a relationship with them, when you talk about them after that, that passion is going to come forward. The statistics that you learned about keeping them incarcerated, the friendship, the bond that you've developed is going to help you be a passionate, educated speaker when it comes to politicians, when it comes to the bureaucracy. Write a letter to your politicians at the end of today. Write a letter to Tony, to the doctors that we have incarcerated. You know, write a letter to the Hemp Embassy thanking them for it. Volunteer your time. Tell them, hey, you know what? I like what she said. I want to start writing a letter every week. You know, how can I do that? Can I create the letter and then have them print it? And maybe it'll be available at the Hemp Embassy for every single person coming in to sign it, to mail it. Take action on little steps. Create a Facebook event at between 2 and 4 that you're going to be at the hemp embassy, that you're just back there with your piece of paper and that you're asking people to sign it, whether it's to send to a politician, to send to the prison, to send to Tony, to send to anybody that's in here. But create groups that you work together. Canna moms should be working together for a community with their children. We got people up and leaving their homes in different states, and we call them, they're fugitives pretty much. They're moving and going to what they call a legal state. CPS is on their way. They literally have to move to Colorado because they're terrified. They want safe access for their children without fear of being raided and arrested. And they're getting it because they're finding a community. If we have a safe community, a safeguard, then these injustices will happen less and less frequently. If we're allowing everybody in the news to see what's going on and how much support, they're going to stop. They're going to see this. So I know that Tony does have a court case coming up. If we could write letters, write to the judicial system, write to the judge, write to whomever we need to write to and let them know that we're not going to tolerate it. Write character reference letters on his behalf. Just stand outside the courthouse while his court case is happening. Let everybody see that we're not afraid, we're not embarrassed. This is a plant nobody's ever died from. Nobody's ever died from this plant. And yet we're getting saliva swabbed. I would just be outraged. Thank gosh I have some sort of amendments that I can stand up for myself and say, I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm just terrified that I can kind of see where this is going to be going in the future. But we need to stop it now. We really need to stop it now. So maybe we can get together tomorrow and we can get up there while we're seeing the cops pulling everybody over and just watch them. Why don't we pull our cameras out and record this and let people know, hey, we're having a great time here in Nimbin, but look at this. Your saliva is up for grabs, you know? So I'm a firm believer of never consenting to a search unless, you know, they're going to mandate you to do something. Always be compliant and polite, but never consent. Try to remain silent, answer questions that are yes or no's, but most importantly, just remain silent because anything you say will be used against you. The police seem to lie no matter what country you're in, and it's a gang. And they're going to peer pressure you. They're going to bully you. And, you know, we're like, oh, I'm legal. I'm compliant. I'm doing whatever I need to do. You don't know what was on the bottom of somebody's shoe. You don't know what fell out of somebody's purse when they got into your car. You gave them a ride. So be careful about that. Just be safe. You know, if you happen to have cannabis, I always tell people, try to leave it in your trunk. Better yet, leave it at home. Don't drive with a vape pen that's anywhere close to you because that could be a DUI or a DWI. Let's create a spray that we could fool the cops with. Like there's got to be some scientists. There's got to be people you want. There's your niche. You know, you want to find a new way in the industry. There it is. To just so you don't test positive for it. Are fighting it. There has to be ways, there has to be community support groups. I hope at the very end of this that if anybody was arrested, incarcerated, or detained this weekend, they have people to go to share this story with them because at the very end of it, you know, they're going to be arrested and incarcerated for a plant. And I really hope that we can come together